I'm going to be talking about a new geospatial method that we have developed, which looks at how you can view and analyze household survey data. The method is called circle point analytics, and it's really about transforming household survey data sets into a geospatial environment so that you can start to get the benefit of getting access to survey data sets in South Africa and elsewhere in the world. Right, I'd like to focus on three things, and I was lying in bed the other day and one of these Facebook things just popped up and it said, when you do a presentation, let's be provocative. So I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I'm going to be provocative in focusing on three things. One of them being Census 2002 is not fit for purpose. And I think that we need to not underestimate the importance of what the census information is for our country and in terms of especially the geospatial industry. I'm then just going to touch base on the method that we call the circle point analysis, which is really a very rapid qualitative method by which you can look at household survey data, not only in terms of looking at the quality of it, and in many instances, people that implement household surveys in our country are not utilizing geospatial information for that particular purposes, and then also looking at it from a point of view of how you can make informed decisions using this information. And then finally, I'd like to just talk about artificial intelligence and some of the innovation that we need in the socio-economic environment, especially in looking at how we can look at the development of censuses and geospatial intelligence. Now, I've been in the industry for more than 30 years, and my background has really been in developing census information. I've assisted in the writing of books in terms of how to utilize census data. I was involved with the first project to capture the census data into geospatial information. And for the last 30 years, I've been utilizing artificial intelligence in taking data from household surveys and mapping them in a geospatial format. There is a basic census approach which one takes in looking at the census from the basics of just demarcating the enumeration areas. And one can utilize remote sensing to do that, as well as the dwelling frame, which Stats South Africa, for example, maintains or has been maintaining. There is also the seamless integration of that data into what they call a hierarchy geography, which is represented in the graphic on the right-hand side. And then there is the collection of data. Now, historically, that data was a paper questionnaire, but for the first time in 22, it was a digital approach and the utilization of what we call telephonic and online methods in order to collect that particular data. What was critically important, and this is why I believe that we can say that the census is not fit for purpose, is that the post-enumeration survey, which is a standard procedure in the conducting of a census, was conducted. Before I get on to that, people might be asking this question, well, why is this so important that we need to be re-looking at the census? The census is utilized for the purposes of looking at the allocation of revenue to the 9 provinces and to metros in our country. And that is done by the Financial and Fiscal Commission, and they utilize a method called the equitable share formula. So if the population at a provincial, even at a metro level is incorrect, the allocation of funding to those particular areas will be significantly impacted, to the extent that what has happened is that the city of Johannesburg is now questioning the data because their population has not increased significantly. As a consequence, their revenue is going to be impacted. And we also hear via rumor that National Treasury is also now starting to question it because you can see the impact it potentially may have in terms of revenue allocation. And there are many other applications of the census data, from the building of administrative boundaries, planning and programmatic, the provision of government services. Without this data, it becomes very, very difficult to utilize geospatial methods in looking at either government services or retail outlets. And from a demographic point of view or demographer's point of view, it is vitally important because it gives us a very thorough understanding of the extent of fertility and mortality in our country, the extent of migration. Is semi-migration to the Western Cape, as an example, as bad as what everybody says it is? And very importantly is that every single year, Stats South Africa produces mid-year estimates. Those mid-year estimates are based on the census. And if your census is wrong, your mid-year estimate for the next 10 years will be incorrect. But also very importantly is that the census, because of the building blocks that it has, is one of the most powerful mechanisms by which we can apply artificial intelligence in the modeling of the data into a geospatial format. And also critically important is that it becomes a sampling frame for the conducting of general household surveys or surveys by either in the government sector or the public sector. And if that is wrong, all of our surveys are going to be potentially wrong over the next 10 years. So why is the census not fit for purpose? Well, we had a 31% undercount of the general population. Now, people go like, what is 31%? Well, that 31% is the highest undercount of any country in the world that has registered a census. And if we take that into consideration, we must surely as a country be saying, this is a problem, and we need to fix this problem very carefully. Example of the Western Cape, 36.3% of the population had an undercount, and we had Stats SA presenting a while ago and telling us about the complexities of the implementation of the count in the Western Cape. And it may potentially have an impact on the allocation of revenue to this particular province. So what's happened is that by doing this, and you'll see that there are two tables on the right-hand side, these give you the undercounts in terms of the provinces and the undercount in terms of population group. Now, these you'll see it says weighted. When we looked at the actual value, the original data coming out of the post-enumeration survey, it showed, for example, that the white population was being undercounted by 61%. By applying the weighting, it has now jumped from 61% to 24%. And as a consequence, we're finding that because of the adjustments of those particular population groups, we've got a situation where there's potentially 1 million more people being indicated than what is the actual situation. There are overestimates of the Indian and Asian and white populations, of the population 50 plus, and underestimation of the 5-year and under population. And most critically is that at a provincial and even at a municipal level, there are inconsistencies in the data. And that's why I think that when we continue to hear this aspect fit for purpose, we should be shouting as loud as we can that this is not acceptable. So how can geospatial data make a difference? And we have written to the Statistician General in this regard because we are consultants to Stats SA. This is about the national interest in the first instance. And this is not about saying you made wrong or you doing wrong. This is about a stakeholder partnership where we can start to look at the situation and see how we can fix it. So the problem that you have is this. They used a mixed methodology. They did telephonic interviews. They did online interviews. They did digital questions. How do you bring about the integration of that information in order to do a proper enumeration of the population? Because in the one instance, you've got an enumeration area number, but in the other instances, if it's an online or telephonic, the only way that you can integrate that data is by geocoding it. And you've got to geocode it down to the address level. Having geocoded to the address level, you can aggregate those data sets together. Now, once that data is aggregated, you can then do very important comparatives. Stats SA has got a dwelling frame. Does this match to the dwelling frame of Stats SA? Does it match to previous censuses that we've seen? Does it match to some of the demographic aspects that we would know we'd be looking at, ratios of male to female, age group profiles, and so forth? So those are very, very important aspects. And there is not an inkling of a doubt that if we applied artificial intelligence mechanisms to this, we would be able to do an effective validation of what is happening with the census. Now, the future will be, and Stats SA is already moving in that direction, is to utilize artificial intelligence to do automated dwelling detection and then transfer data from secondary sources, such as general household surveys, to the dwelling frame to be able to provide us with regular data at a much more granular level. And that's where the future is, not only in South Africa, but in the whole of the world. We cannot, as a country, continue to spend 3 billion rand for the conducting of a census. That money should be utilized in bringing about economic growth and so forth. So we need to be looking at how we go forward. So just to be able to give you an idea of why circle point analytics is potentially a powerful new method, is just to give you a bit of a background in terms of the fundamentals of a household survey. So when Stats South Africa conducts a survey, they utilize the previous census data as their sampling frame. The enumeration area then becomes what we call the primary sampling unit of that survey. What they then do is they look at the distribution of the population across the 9 provinces, and they then do a proportional aggregation to those provinces to say this is the number of people that we need to draw from the 9 provinces in order for the survey to be nationally representative. So it's a very, very scientific approach to how sample is drawn. It's what we call an area-based or cluster sample. And when we talk about that, it means that once the enumeration area has been selected, between 6 and 10 households are systematically and randomly collected within that area, which means that the degree of representation of the data down to the more granular level remains fairly effective. So just to say that the purpose of a household survey, if you look at the design, is for it to only be reported with statistical precision at a provincial level. And in terms of the general household survey, where you've got about 20,000 people being interviewed on an annual basis, you can go to the larger metros, but not the smaller ones like Nelson Mandela. So what is a circle point analysis? It's in essence a rapid qualitative method for the mapping of household survey data sets and try and identify if there are specific patterns. Many of the data sets that we are requiring are not being collected through whatever means possible, but the household surveys provide a means on which we can collect incredible information about the socio-economic and the living standards of people in our country. So the way that we go about it is that we geocode the records from the general household survey down to the centroid of the enumeration area. And this particular map here shows the distribution of the 2023 General Household Survey from StatSA. You'll see that there is heat mapping there, where you can see that the hotter areas are areas where more people are being interviewed because of the size of the population in that particular area. But there is a generally good distribution across the whole of the Cape Peninsula. But by putting it into a spatial context, we start to even question the normal statistical methods that agencies are using in order to ensure that it's even more representative than what it should be. So what we then do is that we do a dispersion of those points. Because of ethics and confidentiality aspects, we may not represent that respondent at the actual location where they live, or at the enumeration area level, because there is a chance that you're able to identify that individual and compromise their confidentiality. So what you do is you take that data and you disperse it into a circle. The center of the circle then is representative of the area where that information is coming from. And each of the points making up the circle is then an answer to a question from the survey. And you can color code it or thematically map that information to try and see if there are any particular trends. Now, in certain instances, there will be no significant trend. But in others, you will start to pick up patterns, and that would allow you to do more detailed investigations as to why that situation is arising in that particular area. What's also important is that once we're looking at the data as a qualitative technique, we can also do what we call relational analysis. Relational analysis is going back to the survey data set and being able to analyze it, not only in terms of cross-tabulations, but other statistical methods to try and get an understanding of what are the factors that are potentially causing that situation in a particular area. So one of the things that people always talk about, we don't have up-to-date unemployment figures in the country. So other than unemployment, also income distribution is also an important aspect. But an incredibly valuable aspect of this technique is that once you put it into a spatial format, you can then start to overlay other layers of information to get a deeper understanding of the data, which you have not been able to do before. For example, townships. In South Africa, we talk glibly about, oh, look, this is the situation that's happening in townships, and this is what's happening and so forth. And we don't truly have an understanding. We don't have the data necessary for us to be able to do that. But by utilizing this technique, we can overlay the townships, which you can see on the map there in yellow, and we can start to analyze what is happening in the townships. And we need to know what's happening in the township. The townships are very, very different. In South Africa, when we talk about a township, we generally say it's an African or a black township. But in our country, we consistently forget that there are also Indian and Asian and colored townships, and each of them are very, very different to one another. And we need to understand that about the township and how things are changing. You know, since 94, we've had a significant movement of people from townships, not only within the periphery of the township, but also into the areas closer to places of work. And we need to understand those dynamics. And this starts to provide you with those sort of trends. So you're able to then create what we call CASI surveys which are now, you can utilize the data for purposes of understanding the characteristics of townships. And then just on the right-hand side here, you'll see a graphic of the income distribution for townships versus non-township areas. And one can see probably a logical trend of the situation that in the townships, there are higher numbers of people in the lower income brackets compared to the non-township areas, which are in the higher brackets. And then, of course, which possibly expect is a fairly high percentage of the population in the non-township areas not wanting to tell you what income they are earning. Now, the other thing that you can't really see is that the circles that you see here are colored to indicate what the income is. But there are a lot of little black dots. Those black dots indicate that the person did not know what their income is. They either refused or was not applicable. In other words, it was a scholar or a person that was unemployed. But the reality being is that a high proportion of the interviews that were conducted in 2023 in the Cape Peninsula area, people did not declare their income. And that is a very, very scary aspect that we need to be looking at and saying, this is the value of this technique in looking at improving the quality of the situation and the quality of the data. So just to give you a reflection of a variable which we would not necessarily be able to collect from any other source is the question of how happy are people in the Cape Peninsula? Okay, now this one is a reflective of a broad category of questions, such as, for example, what is the mindset of South Africans at this moment in time, considering we've just had a national election as an example? Or what is the psychographics? What are the things that drive the values? We know that values are a critical factor in people making decisions, whether it comes to a motor car or electing a political party. So this sort of method can start to look at those particular aspects. So here are the questions, and I would like you to start picturing the Cape Peninsula and starting in your own mind, starting to think about these questions. Who are the unhappiest people? Where are the most unhappiest people in the Cape Peninsula? What are the communities where happiness has remained the same? Who are the happiest people in the Cape Peninsula? Do the levels of happiness match your understanding of what is happening in the community? And finally, what factors drive these levels of happiness in the Cape Peninsula? So this is the map, and the Turtle Point analysis is showing red to reflect people that are less happy. And if you look at the Circle Point analysis, the more points that are red in a particular area, the greater the predominance of unhappiness. Remember, the surveys are designed to be representative of the concentration of the population. So you would anticipate that there are more interviews conducted in the townships. But if you look at it very carefully, you'll see that particular areas here, there is a closing of that circle with reds, reflecting that it is in the township areas where there are the highest levels of unhappiness in the Cape Peninsula. So where are the areas where the happiness has remained largely the same? Well, there is a fairly good distribution of people, but if you're again looking at the black dots, you'll see that those are areas where people are not saying that things have remained the same. It's either they've got happier or that the situation has got worse. So you can start to see that there is a degree of clustering of the points in areas like Blue Downs area, as an example, to some degree up here in the northern suburbs of the Cape Peninsula. And then where are the people the happiest, or where have they become happier? It's southern suburbs. Now, does that surprise you? Does it confirm what your belief would be? And the question then becomes, is what's driving those particular aspects? The value of this data is that you can utilize it for purposes of starting to gain an understanding of what are the factors, why people are unhappy, and what government needs to be doing in order to improve the situation at a fairly local level, community level in the Cape Peninsula area and other parts of the country. So just a quick final thoughts. I think it is vital that we get access to the granular data for South Africa. I'm not sure that Stats SA is thinking about it. We have made representation to them that it needs to be looked at, and that there are geospatial methods that need to be applied in order to look at improving the situation. We need to be starting to look at census innovation. Stats South Africa at the moment is starting to look at the use of artificial intelligence as a mechanism of rapidly mapping every single dwelling across the country, and the ability to transfer secondary data sources to those points in order to update the population estimates on a regular basis at a granular level for the country. Small area estimation is a distinctive method that can be used and has been used extensively, which we have been doing for the last 30 years. This is an example of it where we've taken a survey data set and we've now mapped the dominance of the living standard measures across Gauteng. There is myriads of research that has been done which shows that it can be done if it's an area-based sample with sufficient precision or an understanding of the error associated with the values, and it is generally in a range of below 10%. I think that circle point analysis, although it is a new technique, is innovative. It's going to provide rapid access to data sets, whether it be in terms of socio-economic characteristics, living conditions, or in terms of consumer behavior that South Africa critically needs in order to make more informed decisions. One of the things that we would like to see is the development of an application where the radius of the circle can be increased and decreased, the weights from the survey can be applied, and the points can be proportionally changed to give you a reflection of what is happening across the country, and the ability to very easily select any variable coming out from any survey in order to get a perspective of what is happening in our country on a fairly regular basis.